Mr. Miller, I just emailed you a copy of the divorce agreement, Daniel said, standing before the floor-to-ceiling window, his fingers unconsciously tracing the edge of his phone. It's the one my wife and I signed on our wedding day. Can you look it over and see if there are any issues? Mr. Hayes, I've reviewed the agreement, and everything is in order, the lawyer's professional voice replied. There's 1 month left until the 3-year term is up. Once it expires, the agreement automatically takes effect. You'll just need to file the final paperwork to get the divorce decree. All right, thank you. After hanging up, Daniel looked up at the wedding portrait on the wall. In the photo, he was dressed in a white tuxedo, smiling with pure contentment. But Sarah, standing beside him in a pristine white gown, was beautiful yet utterly devoid of a smile. The presence of love, and the lack of it, was obvious at a glance. The day is almost here, he murmured to himself, his fingertip gently tracing the woman's cool, elegant profile in the photograph. You must be so happy. The sound of a key in the lock came from the front door. Daniel quickly pulled his hand away and turned to greet her. You're home, he said, taking the coat Sarah shrugged off. He then knelt to swap her heels for slippers, his movements so practiced they seemed rehearsed 1,000 times over. Sarah rubbed her temples, her expression cool and distant. The Donovan Corporation's anniversary gala is next month. I need you to be there. Daniel's hands paused as he was hanging her coat. He shook his head. I can't make it. And why not? Sarah frowned. Just as Daniel was about to speak, a look of cold realization crossed her face. Is this because I've been spending time with Leo? I told you on our wedding day that I was in love with someone else. You said you wouldn't interfere. A sharp pain shot through Daniel's heart, as if a wound had been ripped open. It was true. What wife tells her husband on their wedding night that her heart belongs to another, then has him sign an agreement to divorce in 3 years? He was simply fulfilling her wish. He wouldn't be here next month, which was why he couldn't attend the gala. 3 years ago, the Hayes and the Donovans, two of the city's most powerful families, announced their impending union. Daniel had been in love with Sarah since they were kids and was ecstatic when he learned he would marry her. But on their wedding night, Sarah handed him a prenuptial agreement with a dissolution clause. I'm in love with someone, but his family isn't wealthy, and the Donovans won't approve the match, she had said, her tone as blunt as her words. I'm going to use the next 3 years to take control of the Donovan Corporation. Once I'm in charge, no one will dare to oppose me. For these 3 years, we'll be husband and wife on the surface, and then we'll divorce. That night, Daniel signed the papers as she wished, then spent the entire night smoking on the balcony. Less than 3 months into their marriage, after an argument with Sarah, Leo vanished without a trace. Sarah searched for him frantically, pulling every string she had, but found nothing. During that period, she stayed out all night, every night. When she did return, she reeked of alcohol, her eyes dark and terrifyingly bleak. Then one night, she came home blind drunk, collapsing onto the bed in his arms. Her kiss, heavy with the scent of liquor, fell upon him, but the name she whispered wasn't his. Leo, why did you leave? Why are you with someone else? Don't you trust me? Daniel froze, his entire body rigid. His heart felt like it was being crushed in a vice, the pain so intense he could barely breathe. So, she had found him, but Leo was already with another woman. That night was their first time together, yet Sarah held Daniel while calling another man's name all night long. The next morning, Sarah saw the telltale stain on the sheets. Her gaze faltered for a second, but she said nothing. Daniel acted as if nothing had happened. He laid out a fresh change of clothes for her and, before she left, gently reminded her about an important meeting. He pretended it was nothing, but inside his heart was bleeding. From that day forward, he treated her with even more meticulous care. Her stomach was sensitive, so he woke up early every morning to make her a special, soothing oatmeal. When she was stressed from work, he learned how to give massages to ease her exhaustion. She valued quiet, so he never made a sound, even learning to walk silently around the house. Gradually, Sarah seemed to begin accepting him as her husband. She started bringing him small gifts from her business trips. She would make him hot tea with medicine when he caught a cold. She even began to slip into his arms late at night, falling asleep with her warm palm resting peacefully against his side. Sarah never mentioned the divorce again, as if their agreement had never existed. Daniel was naive enough to believe that maybe, just maybe, she was starting to fall in love with him. That was until 3 months ago, when Leo broke up with his girlfriend and moved back to New York. Sarah went back to Leo's side almost immediately. She took him out to dinner, went shopping with him, and even canceled important meetings simply because Leo said he was feeling down. Standing by the window, watching Sarah's car head toward Leo's apartment yet again, Daniel finally understood. Her first love was her first love. Nothing he did could ever compete with a single glance from Leo. At least the 3-year contract was finally coming to an end. He told himself to think of it all as just a dream. Now, the dream was over, and it was time for him to leave. "Why are you so quiet?" Sarah's voice broke through his thoughts. Daniel stared at her, a lump forming in his throat. Had she forgotten about their agreement? For 3 years, he had counted down every single day, dreading the moment she would leave without a second thought. Yet now, she seemed to have forgotten all about it. He opened his mouth to remind her, but just then, Sarah's phone rang. The moment she answered, Daniel could hear Leo's voice on the other end. He couldn't make out the words, but he saw the color drain from Sarah's face. "Wait for me," she said urgently. "I'm on my way." She hung up, grabbed her keys, and bolted for the door. In her haste, she slammed into Daniel, sending him stumbling back against the doorframe. He let out a muffled grunt of pain, but Sarah didn't even glance back, her figure already gone. Leaning on the wall for support, Daniel walked slowly back to the bedroom. He took off his shirt, revealing a large bruise already forming on his shoulder. He got out the first aid kit and silently treated the injury, his heart feeling as though it were being carved up with a dull blade. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly as the sky outside darkened, until his phone rang. It was Sarah. "Get to City General Hospital." Daniel's heart leaped into his throat. "What's wrong?" he asked instinctively. "Just get here." When Daniel arrived, he saw Sarah standing outside the operating room from down the hall. Leo was leaning against her, his eyes red and swollen. Daniel's steps faltered, a crushing weight settling on his chest that made it hard to breathe. "What happened?" he asked softly as he approached. Sarah looked up at him. "Leo's mother has sudden onset leukemia. She needs a bone marrow transplant immediately." Daniel was taken aback. "And we've checked the entire city registry. No matches," Sarah said flatly. "I got tested. I'm a match." Daniel's eyes widened in disbelief. "You're going to be the donor? There are risks to donating. You can't just—" "I didn't call you here for your permission," Sarah cut him off. "The surgery requires a signature from next of kin." Next of kin. The words were a knife in Daniel's heart. Legally, yes, he was still her husband, but in her heart, he had never been her family. Daniel clenched his fist so tightly his nails dug into his palms. "Fine," he heard himself say. "I'll sign." A nurse handed him the consent forms. He signed his name, each stroke of the pen feeling like a fresh cut across his heart. Sarah released Leo and turned toward the operating room. In the final second before the door swung shut, Daniel couldn't stop himself from calling out her name. "Sarah." She turned, her expression impassive. His lips trembled, but all he could manage to say was a quiet, "Be careful." A flicker of something crossed Sarah's eyes, but she said nothing before turning and disappearing into the ore. The moment the door closed, the tears Daniel had been holding back finally fell. He understood now. Sarah's love for Leo ran so deep, she was willing to risk her own life for him. The light above the operating room door remained lit. The hallway was silent except for the sound of breathing. Daniel sat on a bench, his fingertips ice cold, while Leo sat across from him, his eyes bloodshot, constantly glancing toward the doors. Finally, Leo spoke, his voice soft. "Mr. Hayes, I'm sorry to have caused you so much trouble again." Daniel looked up at him, but said nothing. Leo wiped at his eyes, his voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined that after all these years, Sarah would still feel so deeply for me." He paused, a nostalgic look on his face. "Did you know for my birthday last year, she flew all the way to Paris just to give me a watch? It was a model I'd mentioned offhand that I liked once." She actually remembered, but I was still giving her the cold shoulder, so I threw it back at her face and didn't even let her inside. Daniel's fingers clenched into a fist, his nails digging into his palm. He remembered it perfectly. Last year, Sarah had told him she was going on a business trip for 3 days. When she returned, she'd brought back a watch and casually given it to him. He had been overjoyed, treasuring the watch at the bottom of his dresser drawer, never even daring to wear it. And now he knew the truth. It was just something Leo had rejected, a hand-me-down she had casually passed on to him. Leo continued. "Then there was Christmas 2 years ago. I had a huge fight with my girlfriend and posted something really depressing on Facebook. Sarah saw it and got on a plane that night. She stood outside my apartment building all night long in a blizzard but she never worked up the nerve to knock. Daniel's heart seized. He remembered that Christmas. Sarah had been unusually passionate, and he had foolishly thought she was finally developing feelings for him. When he woke the next morning, her side of the bed was cold, and he'd assumed she'd been called away on urgent business. The truth was, she had rushed off to be with Leo. For these past 3 years, Leo's tears started falling again. I was stubborn, intentionally not contacting her. But Sarah never forgot about me for a single day. She wrote me an email every single day, even though I never once replied. Daniel suddenly felt like he couldn't breathe. All those late nights, he'd seen the light on in her office. He'd assumed she was working. He'd even brought her coffee. But she hadn't been working. She had been writing love letters to Leo. He had always believed that, at least while Leo was gone, Sarah had genuinely wanted to build a life with him. Now, he realized it had all been a delusion from start to finish. The heart he thought he was finally winning over had belonged to someone else the entire time. As Leo opened his mouth to say more, Daniel shot to his feet. His face was deathly pale, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "I have to go." Before Leo could respond, Daniel turned and walked away, his pace quickening until he was practically running. When he got home, he silently packed his bags, ready for the day their agreement expired. In the meantime, he saw constant updates about Sarah on Leo's Facebook page. Her surgery was a success, but she didn't rest. She immediately arranged for Leo's mother to be moved to the best private suite, flew in a top medical team from Europe, and personally oversaw every detail of the treatment plan. Leo's most recent Facebook post was a photo. It showed Sarah sitting by a hospital bed, and in her arm, carefully peeling a pomegranate for his mother. The caption read, "I'll never find anyone who loves me this much again." A sharp pain lanced through Daniel's chest. A tear hit his phone screen, blurring the image of Sarah's gentle profile. He thought about how, for years, he had cared for her with that same devotion. He made her special oatmeal for her sensitive stomach. He always left a light on for her when she worked late. He always peeled and sliced her fruit into perfect, bite-sized pieces. And now, she was doing all of that for someone else. He took a deep breath, wiped the tears from his eyes, and told himself it was all right. Once he was free of his love for her, he would finally learn to love himself. A week later, Sarah came home unexpectedly. Daniel was surprised. He'd assumed she would be glued to Leo's side. "Family dinner tonight," she said curtly. "Get dressed." Daniel understood. He silently changed into a suit and followed her out. At the dinner, the air was filled with the clinking of glasses and polite chatter. Eventually, the conversation turned to him and Sarah. "You two have been married 3 years. Isn't it time for a child?" One relative chimed in. "That's right. Sarah's the head of the family now. There needs to be an heir." Another turned to him. "Daniel, you'd better get to it." Daniel kept his eyes downcast, listening in silence as his fingers traced the rim of his glass. Just then, Sarah, who had been quiet the entire time, finally spoke. "We're not in a hurry." Her voice wasn't loud, but it silenced the entire room. The expressions on the relatives' faces shifted, but given Sarah's position as head of the family, no one dared to say another word. The atmosphere became tense, and the rest of the meal passed in an awkward silence. After dinner, Mrs. Donovan stood up, her sharp gaze fixed on Daniel. "Daniel, come with me to the study." It was obvious to everyone she was about to lecture him on his duty to produce an heir. Sarah clearly saw it coming too. She frowned. "If you have something to say it to me." Just as her mother was about to retort, Sarah's phone rang. She glanced at the caller ID, her expression softening as she stepped away to answer. "Leo, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice gentler than Daniel had ever heard it. Mrs. Donovan scoffed and turned back to Daniel. "Come with me." He pressed his lips together and followed her in silence. The moment the study door closed, her expression turned grim. "Neil." Daniel slowly lowered himself to the cold marble floor. "Do you know what you did wrong?" Mrs. Donovan asked, looking down at him. Daniel kept his eyes lowered, saying nothing. With a loud crack, Mrs. Donovan slammed her hand on the desk. "Your mistake was letting Sarah say she wasn't in a hurry for a child. You should have corrected her." She pulled a small vial from a drawer and set it firmly on the desk. "These are fertility herbs. Starting today, you will take them daily, and you will share a bed with Sarah until she is pregnant." In the past, Daniel would have accepted it without a word. But this time he looked up, his voice quiet but firm. "I won't take them." Mrs. Donovan's eyes narrowed. "What did you say?" "I won't take them," he repeated. "Sarah doesn't want a child right now, and I respect her decision." Every time they had been intimate, Sarah had used protection. On the rare occasions they got carried away, she would take a pill the morning after. He had once naively believed she simply wasn't ready for children yet. Now he understood the truth. She had never, ever wanted to have his child. And since he had already decided to leave, he certainly wouldn't create a permanent bond between them now. What did you just say? Mrs. Donovan's voice rose sharply. I won't take it, Daniel repeated. You dare defy me? Mrs. Donovan was trembling with rage. You fail in your duties as a husband. You didn't even stop Sarah from donating bone marrow to that Leo boy's mother. Bring me the cane, she commanded. A moment later, a servant brought in a thin rattan cane that had been soaked in salt water. Mrs. Donovan held it aloft. I will ask you one last time. Will you take the medicine? Daniel shook his head. The first strike of the cane was a searing line of fire across his back, the pain spreading instantly through his entire body. He clenched his jaw as a cold sweat broke out, soaking his shirt. Are you going to take it? She demanded. Still, he shook his head. The cane fell again and again. Through the large window, he could see Sarah in the garden, still on the phone. Her back was to the house, her posture relaxed. He saw her laugh softly, clearly enjoying her conversation with Leo. Then I will beat you until you understand what is expected of a Donovan husband. The cane tore through his shirt, leaving bleeding welts on his skin. Daniel trembled from the pain, but refused to yield. I won't, he gasped. Blood soaked through his shirt, and his vision started to blur. The last thing he saw before he blacked out was the silhouette of Sarah in the garden, still talking on the phone. As darkness consumed him, Daniel had one last thought. Asterisk, this is for the best. After this, I won't have to feel pain for her ever again. Asterisk, when he next awoke, he was in a hospital bed. He heard the hospital administrator's deferential voice. Ms. Donovan, Mr. Hayes's lacerations are quite deep. In some places, they've reached the dermal layer. Use the best medicine and the best doctors, Sarah's voice replied, cold as ice. I don't want any scars. Of course, we'll do everything we can. After the administrator left, Sarah turned and saw that he was awake. She walked quickly to his bedside, a slight frown on her face. How do you feel? Daniel tried to shift, and a burning pain shot across his back. I'm fine, he said, forcing the words out. The staff here will take care of me. If you're busy, you can go. To his surprise, Sarah didn't leave. She sat down in the chair beside his bed, her expression unreadable. Why didn't you call for me when my mother was giving you trouble? He thought of her in the garden, completely absorbed in her call with Leo, and gave a bitter smile. You look busy. He paused, then asked quietly, if I had called, would you really have come right away? Of course, Sarah answered without a moment's hesitation. Daniel was stunned into silence. Her answer was the last thing he'd expected. I've already dealt with the family, she continued. No one will bother you about having children again. I understand, Daniel said, looking down. You can go now. Why are you always trying to get rid of me? Sarah asked, frowning. Daniel was taken aback. Aren't you busy? Busy with the company, busy with Leo. Not lately, she said, reaching out to straighten his blanket. I can stay and take care of you for a few days. This was the last thing Daniel had expected to hear. For the next several days, Sarah actually stayed at the hospital to look after him. She adjusted his bed, fed him, and even changed his bandages herself. One night, when the pain kept him awake, she sat by his side and gently patted his back as if he were a child, staying until he finally drifted off to sleep. Her tenderness made him feel, for a moment, like they were back in the early days, during their most intimate period. But he wouldn't let himself get lost in the feeling. He had made his decision to leave, and he wasn't going back. A week later, the marks on Daniel's back had faded considerably. As Sarah was applying ointment, he let out an involuntary grunt of pain. Her hand froze. Daniel glanced back in confusion and saw that her eyes had darkened. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her posture had shifted. His own expression changed slightly. Sarah was already moving closer, her breathing growing heavier. Just as her lips were about to meet his, a loud clatter shattered the charged atmosphere in the room. They both turned to see Leo standing in the doorway. A fruit basket lay overturned at his feet, its contents scattered across the floor. His eyes were red, and his voice trembled. Did I interrupt something? Sarah shoved Daniel away from her. Leo, it's not what you think. She moved so abruptly that Daniel was caught off guard. He tumbled backward off the bed, the back of his head striking the sharp corner of the nightstand with a sickening thud. Blood began to pour from the wound. I'll leave you two alone, Leo choked out, then turned and fled. Leo, without a single glance at Daniel bleeding on the floor, Sarah ran after him. Daniel lay on the floor, his vision blurring as blood streamed into his eyes. He started to laugh, a hysterical sound that brought tears to his eyes. By the time a nurse found him, he had passed out from blood loss. His last conscious thought was the sound of a nurse's panicked voice shouting, "Patient has a head wound. Get a doctor in here now." And Sarah never returned. The head injury forced Daniel to stay in the hospital for several more days. Sarah never showed up again. He knew she must be busy comforting Leo, so he didn't call or even send her a single text. On the day he was discharged, the family's housekeeper called to ask about arrangements for Sarah's upcoming birthday party. Daniel held the phone, silent for a long moment. Every year before, he had planned her party himself. The Donovans were a powerful family, but not a warm one. Her parents didn't even know she had a severe peanut allergy and serve a cake with peanut filling every year. He remembered at her first birthday party after they were married, he'd seen her secretly taking an antihistamine. "Why don't you just tell them?" he had asked, his heart aching for her. "There's no point," she'd replied, her expression flat. "They care more about this year's corporate earnings report than my allergies." From that year on, he took over planning her birthday parties himself. Every dish, every floral arrangement was chosen according to her tastes. She never had to deal with decorations she hated or worry about accidentally eating something she was allergic to again. "Sir," the housekeeper's voice prompted him. Daniel took a deep breath. "I'll take care of it. This would be the last time." After the divorce, someone else would be in charge of her birthday. He planned it as meticulously as ever, but this time he had the housekeeper shadow him, explaining every last detail. The cake must be black forest, absolutely no peanuts. The flowers have to be white roses. She hates red ones. And make sure there's no tequila on the bar menu. It gives her headaches. You need to remember all of this, so there are no mistakes next time you plan it. The housekeeper looked confused. "Won't you be planning it next year, sir?" Daniel lowered his eyes and didn't answer. Next time, he wouldn't be a Donovan son-in-law anymore. Of course, he wouldn't be planning it. On the night of the party, the ballroom was a swirl of perfume, designer gowns, and glittering lights. Daniel stood at the entrance in a navy suit, greeting guests. He watched as Sarah made her entrance, her arm linked through Leo's. Sarah was stunning in a strapless red mermaid gown, looking absolutely radiant. In that moment, Daniel knew. It seemed she had successfully smoothed things over with Leo. Sarah's attention was fixed on Leo all night. The moment his glass was empty, she had it refilled. When his collar was slightly askew, she reached up to straighten it. When he tried something he liked and his eyes crinkled in a smile, she would laugh softly, a look of pure tenderness on her face. She never once looked in Daniel's direction. He stood quietly in a corner, greeting guests like a dutiful host. When it came time to open gifts, the guests presented a dazzling array of expensive treasures. The limited edition necklace from Daniel was brought out on a silver tray. "What excellent taste, Mr. Hayes. There are only 10 of these in the entire world," a guest exclaimed. "It suits Ms. Donovan perfectly," another added. "It just goes to show a husband knows best." Sarah glanced at Daniel, a flicker of approval in her eyes, and offered a quiet "thank you." But when she opened Leo's gift, a hush fell over the room. It was a hand-knitted scarf, the stitches uneven and clumsy, clearly the work of a beginner. "What is that?" someone snickered. "Who gives a hand-knitted scarf as a gift these days?" "With that cheap yarn, Ms. Donovan would probably break out in a rash," another whispered. "Who is this guy anyway? How did someone dressed so poorly even get in here?" The color drained from Leo's face, and he instinctively took a step back. Sarah's expression hardened. She picked up the scarf and, in front of everyone, wrapped it around her neck. "I love this gift," she said, her voice quiet but carrying across the now silent room. "I value the thought behind a handmade gift far more than an expensive price tag." Then, she picked up the necklace from Daniel. "As for this," she said coldly, "it may be expensive, but it's meaningless." The clatter of the necklace hitting the bottom of a nearby trash can was jarringly loud. A stunned silence fell over the room, quickly followed by a chorus of sycophantic agreement. "Ms. Donovan is so right. Handmade gifts are so much more personal. Look at the character in those stitches. This gentleman is clearly very talented." Daniel stood frozen, feeling as if the blood had turned to ice in his veins. He had spent 3 months tracking down that necklace, flying to different countries, comparing a dozen different designs before finding the perfect one. And now, she had thrown it away like garbage, all to defend Leo's pride. When he thought about it, this was hardly the first time something like this had happened. She would cancel important meetings for Leo, but couldn't remember his own birthday. She would stay up all night by Leo's side when he was sick, but wouldn't even call when Daniel himself had a raging fever. She would fly halfway around the world at a word from Leo, but couldn't spare an hour to have dinner with him. Every single time, she chose Leo without hesitation, just as she had tossed his gift aside tonight. Daniel placed a hand over his heart. It had once beaten so fiercely for her, but now it felt as still as a stagnant pond. He was learning that love could, in fact, be worn down to nothing. All the excitement, the hope, the pain, it had all been eroded piece by piece with every choice she made. He wouldn't feel sad for her anymore. His heart was empty. For the rest of the evening, all eyes were on Leo. The same guests who had been mocking him moments before were now falling over themselves to flatter him. Daniel stood in the corner and gave a wry smile. These were the rules of their world. A single nod from Sarah Donovan was enough to make anyone the center of attention. It was for the best. After the divorce, she would probably bring Leo into the Donovan family officially. Introducing him to her circle now was just paving the way. The party wound down, and guests began to depart. Daniel stood at the entrance, seeing each guest off with a polite smile, playing the part of the perfect Donovan son-in-law. When the last guest had finally gone, he let out a quiet sigh of relief. As he turned, he saw Sarah and Leo standing by the door. A heavy rain was falling outside, and a cold, damp wind blew in through the open doorway. Leo shivered and let out a small sneeze. Sarah frowned, immediately taking the shawl from her own shoulders and draping it over his. "I'm still cold," Leo mumbled, shivering. Sarah's gaze swept the room and landed on Daniel. Draped over his arm was a cashmere scarf, its soft, cream-colored fabric catching the light. "Give your scarf to Leo," she commanded. Daniel's fingers twitched and the color drained from his face. "This was my grandmother's," he started to say. "I know your late grandmother made it by hand," Sarah cut him off. "Leo is just borrowing it. Don't be so petty." A lump formed in Daniel's throat. His fingers tightened on the edge of the scarf, but in the end, he slowly relaxed his grip and handed it over. He knew that if he refused, Sarah would just have someone take it from him anyway. As he handed it over, Leo took it with an apologetic smile. "Thanks. I'll have it washed and returned to you." "No," Daniel said quickly, shaking his head. "Don't wash it. It can't get wet. It has to be dry cleaned. I'll send someone to pick it up tomorrow." Leo nodded. "Got it." Just then, the driver pulled their car around to the entrance. Sarah glanced at Leo's pale face, her brow furrowed with concern. She turned to Daniel. "Leo seems to be coming down with something. I'm going to take him home. It's out of the way, so you'll have to find your own way back." Before Daniel could reply, she was already helping Leo into the car. The door shut, the engine started, and the black sedan quickly vanished into the rain, leaving Daniel standing alone in the doorway as the storm splattered his clothes. The streets were empty in the downpour. It took Daniel 40 minutes of standing in the cold wind to finally hail a cab. By the time he got home, he was soaked through, his head heavy and his body aching. His forehead was burning up. He managed to take some fever reducer before collapsing into bed. In the middle of the night, his phone began to vibrate incessantly, but his head was pounding so hard he couldn't even lift his arm to answer it. Eventually, it fell silent. The next day, Daniel's fever had finally broken, but his throat was painfully raw. He propped himself up, took a sip of water, and reached for his phone. There were over a dozen unread iMessages, all from Leo. He opened the first one. It was a picture that made his blood run cold. The precious cashmere scarf was submerged in a sink full of water, its soft fibers matted and ruined. The messages appeared one after another. "Oops, so sorry. I forgot you said it couldn't get wet, so I put it in to soak when I got home. Seriously, my bad. How much was it? I'll pay you for it. The material is pretty absorbent, so I can probably still use it as a cleaning rag or something. You're not answering, so I'll assume that's a yes. I'll send you $30. You said your grandma made it, so that should cover it, right?" The final message was another photo. The scarf, cut to ribbons, deliberately and maliciously destroyed. Daniel's hands were shaking, rage boiling up inside him. He threw back the covers, ignoring his own lingering fever, and stormed out of the apartment. He stood outside Leo's door, his expression dangerously cold, and slammed his finger on the doorbell. The door opened to reveal Leo in a bathrobe, looking surprised. "Mr. Hayes? What are you doing here?" "My scarf," Daniel said, his voice like ice. "Where is it?" Leo turned and picked up the ruined scarf from the couch. "You mean this? I already paid you for it, didn't I?" He glanced at his phone. You didn't accept the $30 transfer? Was that not enough? I can send another 20. I mean, an old lady made it. It couldn't have been that expensive. The sharp crack of a slap echoed in the room. Leo stumbled backward, clutching his cheek, staring at Daniel in disbelief. You hit me? Daniel's eyes were blazing. You did this on purpose, he said, his voice low and dangerous. Leo's eyes immediately filled with tears. On purpose? I don't know what you're talking about. You came back to New York on purpose. You called Sarah about your mother's transplant on purpose. You told me all those stories at the hospital on purpose. You walked in on us at the hospital on purpose. And you destroyed my grandmother's scarf on purpose. Daniel took a step closer, his voice dropping to a frigid whisper. Leo, let me make one thing clear. I see your games. Just because I've been silent doesn't mean I'm going to let you walk all over me. Leo's face went pale, but he held his ground. I haven't. I really don't know what you're talking about. Daniel gritted his teeth, about to speak again, when a cold voice cut through the tension from the doorway. Daniel, what do you think you're doing? He whipped around. Sarah was standing there, her expression dangerously grim. Daniel, Sarah strode past him to Leo's side, her fingers gently tracing the red mark on his cheek. Her eyes were filled with a pained expression, as if she were the one who'd been struck. He hit you? What happened? With tears in his eyes, Leo told his version of the story. With every word, Sarah's expression grew colder. It was just a scarf, she said, turning to Daniel, her voice dripping with ice. Was it really worth hitting someone over? Just a scarf? Daniel's voice shook with rage. Sarah, that was the only thing I had left from my grandmother. For a moment, Sarah looked taken aback. In 3 years of marriage, he had always been gentle, always considerate. He had never once raised his voice to her. Seeing him now, with his eyes red and his shoulders trembling, he seemed like a complete stranger. Leo didn't mean to do it, she said, her tone softening slightly. And he already offered to pay you back. What more do you want? If you're not happy with the amount, I'll compensate you. She pulled a checkbook from her purse, scribbled a number, and held it out to him. Is this enough? Daniel stared at the check, his heart clenching so painfully he could barely breathe. When he didn't take it, Sarah frowned, tore it up, and wrote out another one for a larger amount. Still not enough? She asked, her tone businesslike. Then how about this? She wrote another, and then another, each for a higher amount. The numbers grew, but Daniel's heart only grew colder. Finally, he reached out and took the last check, his fingertips trembling. It's enough, he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet it seemed to take all the strength he had. Enough of this, Sarah. It wasn't just the check that was enough. Their marriage was enough. He turned to leave, but after only 2 steps, Sarah's icy voice stopped him. Stop. Daniel froze, but didn't turn around. You took the money, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. But we're not finished here. Apologize to Leo. Daniel went rigid. He slowly turned back to face her, his eyes burning. What did you say? I said, apologize, she repeated, her own eyes cold and hard. And if I don't, he asked, his voice shaking. The Hayes and Donovan corporations still have business together, Sarah said calmly, but her words cut like a knife. Daniel's breath caught in his throat. It felt like she had stabbed him through the heart. He couldn't believe she would threaten him with his parents' company, with their life's work. The air in the room grew thick and still. Finally, Daniel lowered his head. I'm sorry, he said, his voice hoarse. Leo, still clutching his cheek, spoke up. Do you really mean that, Mr. Hayes? Or is this just how you wealthy people give a half-hearted apology? Daniel's fists clenched at his sides, his nails digging into his palms. Then he bowed low before Leo. I'm sorry, he said, his voice thick with emotion, but every word clear. Mr. Vance, I was wrong to strike you. Please forgive me. He straightened up and looked at Sarah. Is that sufficient? Staring into his reddened eyes, she felt an unexpected pang of something. She suddenly remembered him looking at her just like that 3 years ago, when he'd had a dangerously high fever. But back then, his eyes had been filled with love and adoration. Now, they were empty, holding nothing but a dead, hollow calm. Her throat felt tight. She wanted to say something, but all that came out was a cold. It's sufficient. Daniel turned and walked away, his back ramrod straight, never once looking back. Behind him, he heard Sarah's gentle voice. Does it still hurt? Let me put something on it for you. He heard Leo's soft reply. Yes, it hurts. Be gentle. Daniel didn't break his stride as a single, silent tear fell, which he quickly wiped away, leaving no trace behind. In the days that followed, Sarah didn't come home and Daniel didn't call her. On the day their agreement officially expired, he went to the courthouse alone to file the final papers. When the clerk handed him the finalized divorce decree, he took it calmly. His fingers brushed over the embossed seal, and he felt nothing at all. It was still early when he walked out of the courthouse. He hailed a cab to go back to the Donovan mansion and pick up the last of his things. When he pushed open the door, he was surprised to find Sarah standing in the middle of the living room, impeccably dressed. "Where have you been?" she asked. He opened his mouth, but before he could speak, she continued, "It's our anniversary today. Were you out getting a gift?" Daniel froze. He'd completely forgotten. It was their anniversary. 3 years ago today, they had exchanged rings, surrounded by friends and family. That very night, she had handed him the agreement, telling him it was just a business arrangement and not to take it seriously. It would all be over in 3 years. The irony was bitter. The day their divorce was finalized was the same day as their wedding anniversary. It was no wonder she assumed he'd been out buying a gift. Every year, he had planned something special for her, even though she herself never remembered the date. So why had she remembered this year? And did she also remember that it was the day their agreement expired? A storm of thoughts raged in Daniel's mind, but he just clutched the papers in his bag and nodded. "Yes, I was out getting a gift. The divorce decree. That was a gift of a sort." Sarah nodded, unfazed. "I'm taking Leo skiing in Switzerland tomorrow, so I thought I'd take you out to celebrate our anniversary tonight." She glanced at her watch. "I made a reservation at the rooftop restaurant at La Maison. You can give me my gift then. Let's go." She grabbed her coat from the back of a chair and headed for the door. But Daniel didn't move. When she reached the door, she realized he wasn't behind her and turned, frowning. "What are you waiting for?" Daniel opened his mouth, but he couldn't bring himself to say the words, to tell her he was leaving for good. After a moment's silence, he made an excuse. "I have something I need to finish up. You go ahead. I'll meet you there." Sarah didn't seem to notice anything was amiss. She just nodded and left. Daniel stood at the window and watched her black car pull out of the driveway and disappear around the corner. It was the first time in 3 years she had remembered their anniversary, and it was the first time he no longer cared. He slowly pulled the crisp, new divorce decree from his bag and laid it on the coffee table. Then he picked up the suitcase he had packed long ago, gently closed the front door, and walked away. On the coffee table, the divorce decree lay next to the uncashed check. Sunlight streamed through the window, glinting off the staggering number of zeros, a sum that could never buy back a grandmother's scarf, much less 3 years of a devoted heart. The lights at La Maison were dazzling, but Sarah's mood was not. She checked her watch for the 3rd time, an involuntary frown creasing her brow. "Ms. Donovan, would you like me to try and contact Mr. Hayes for you?" the manager asked respectfully. Sarah waved a dismissive hand. "No, that won't be necessary." She pulled out her phone and saw that Daniel still hadn't replied to her texts. That wasn't like him. He always replied to her messages immediately. Frowning, she left the restaurant. As the night wind brushed against her face, a strange sense of unease began to creep in. When she got home and pushed open the door, the house was silent. Sarah frowned, her eyes scanning the room. 2 items lying on the coffee table immediately caught her eye. The divorce decree, and beside it, the check she had written. Sarah's pupils contracted, her heart seizing as if gripped by an invisible hand. Her hand trembled as she picked up the decree, her eyes scanning the date again and again. "Today's date. Daniel," she whispered, a note of panic in her voice that she didn't even recognize. Her phone suddenly rang, shattering the silence. The screen read, "Leo." "Sarah." Leo's cheerful voice came through the phone. "Where are you? I made your favorite dinner. Can you come over?" "I'm home," Sarah replied automatically, her eyes still glued to the divorce decree. "Great. I'll bring it over," he said, hanging up before she had a chance to object. 20 minutes later, Leo walked into the living room, his eyes immediately falling on the papers on the coffee table. "Oh my God," he exclaimed, taking a dramatic step back. "What is this? Is he divorcing you?" Sarah, sitting on the couch, gave a numb, emotionless nod. A flicker of triumph flashed in Leo's eyes, quickly masked by a look of concern. He sat down beside her, his own eyes welling up. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry. Is this because of me? Because I ruined that scarf? I know men can get jealous, but I never thought he'd threaten you with divorce over it." Sarah's fingers traced the edge of the decree. For the first time, she didn't rush to comfort him. "Sarah?" Leo asked, a hint of panic in his voice as he studied her expression. "You're not having second thoughts, are you? I can go to him. I can apologize." I'll get on my knees and beg him if I have to. Second thoughts? Don't be ridiculous, Sarah scoffed, her voice laced with forced contempt. He was just a pawn in a business deal. She finally looked at him. And don't worry, this wasn't your fault. You didn't do it on purpose. Leo smiled, satisfied, and wrapped an arm around her waist, pulling her into a hug. I've always said, a boring man like that was never good enough for you anyway. Sarah's body tensed for a fraction of a second before she relaxed into his embrace, reaching up to run a hand through his hair. But, Leo said, sitting up and feigning confusion, why wouldn't he take the check? You don't think he's already found someone else, do you? Sarah's expression instantly turned to ice. Oh, I'm just speculating, Leo added quickly, waving his hands dismissively. Who would want a guy like him anyway? He's probably just doing this to get a reaction out of you. After all, he's completely devoted to you. Sarah stood up, walked over to the bar, and poured herself a whiskey. She downed it in one gulp, the burning liquid doing nothing to quell the strange, unsettling feeling that was growing inside her. Sarah, Leo said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. Don't think about him. Your divorce is a good thing, isn't it? Now we can, Leo, Sarah said, gently removing his hands. I need to be alone tonight. Leo frowned. But how about this, she said, forcing a smile. Tomorrow, we can go look at that new sports car you've been wanting. After Leo had reluctantly departed, Sarah stood at the window, staring out into the night. After a long while, she pulled out her phone and called her assistant. Find Daniel Hayes, she said, her voice hoarse, fighting against a rising tide of panic that threatened to consume her. And be discreet. After she hung up, her gaze fell once more on the divorce decree. This was the outcome they had agreed to from the very beginning. So why did she feel so hollow? She thought of all the little things over the past 3 years. The special oatmeal he made for her every morning. The lamp he always left on for her when she came home late. The look of pure adoration in his eyes when he was near her. Damn it, she screamed, hurling her glass against the wall, where it shattered into 1,000 pieces. This wasn't how it was supposed to feel. His leaving was a good thing. It was what she wanted, wasn't it? Sarah stood on the balcony, oblivious as the damp night air settled on her hair. Her assistant called at 2 in the morning. Ms. Donovan, I have an address from Mr. Hayes. Her head snapped up. Send it to me. Daniel's new apartment was in a run-down building in Queens. There was no elevator, and the hallways were narrow and dim. Sarah stood outside his door, frowning. She couldn't imagine the man who had lived in the lap of luxury at her family's estate choosing to live in a place like this. She raised her hand and knocked, the sound firm and insistent. She heard soft footsteps from inside, then the sound of the deadbolt sliding back. Daniel opened the door. The moment he saw her, his eyes widened in shock. He was dressed in a simple t-shirt and sweatpants, his hair casually pushed back from his forehead. He looked comfortable and relaxed, and for some reason, she couldn't look away. Her gaze lingered on him for a moment before she sneered. What's this? Living in a place like this? Are you trying to make some kind of point? Daniel's hand tightened on the doorknob, but his expression remained neutral. Can I help you with something, Ms. Donovan? Can you help me? She scoffed, pushing past him into the apartment. It was a small one-bedroom, but impeccably clean. A few architecture books were stacked on the coffee table next to a steaming mug of tea. Sarah's eyes took it all in, and the unsettling feeling inside her grew stronger. Couldn't wait to move out the second the divorce was final, she asked, turning to look down her nose at him. What's the matter? Afraid I'd change my mind? Daniel gently closed the door. You're joking, Ms. Donovan, he said, his voice even. It was a contract marriage. The contract expired. This is perfectly normal. Normal, she said, narrowing her eyes and taking a step closer. Then why didn't you take the check? He met her gaze, and the clarity in his eyes was like a physical blow. I didn't need it, he said softly. I don't want to take a single thing from you or your family. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. His words were like a dull knife, slowly twisting in her chest. She stared at him, then let out a cold laugh. Daniel Hayes, did you really think a piece of paper was enough to get rid of me? He frowned. What are you talking about, Ms. Donovan? She looked him straight in the eye. Come back, she said, enunciating every word. Your place as a Donovan son-in-law is still waiting for you. The air in the small apartment grew thick and still. Daniel stared at her for a second before letting out a short, harsh laugh. Go back. To do what? To continue playing the part of the convenient husband while you're with Leo? My relationship with him is none of your business. You're right, it's not, Daniel agreed, his gaze intense as he watched her growing irritation. "So, I have to ask, Ms. Donovan, in what capacity are you asking me to come back?" For once, Sarah was at a loss for words. He was right. On what grounds? They were divorced. The thought sent a strange, constricting pang through her chest. "Daniel," she said, her voice low and warning. "Don't test my patience." He just looked at her, a bitter, ironic smile touching his lips. 3 years, and nothing had changed. She was still the same, always looking down on him, always expecting him to bend to her will. "Ms. Donovan," he said, his voice firm and clear, "we are over." Her eyes widened in shock. Just then, her phone began to ring. The name Leo on the screen was impossible to miss. Daniel's gaze flickered to it, and the corner of his mouth lifted in a faint, ironic smile. "Ms. Donovan, your first love is calling." Sarah shot him a glare and a sneer, but answered the call. "Sarah," Leo's voice purred from the phone. "Where are you? I can't sleep. I miss you." Her eyes were still locked on Daniel's face, but her voice became deliberately soft and sweet. "I'm just taking care of something. I'll be back later." Daniel turned his head, refusing to look at her. "Hurry back," Leo said. "I'll be waiting." Sarah hung up and stared at Daniel's profile. She reached out, grabbing his chin and forcing him to face her. "Daniel Hayes," she said, her voice a low growl. "Don't you dare think this is over." She released him and stormed out, slamming the door so hard a picture on the wall rattled. Daniel stood frozen in place for a long time before slowly raising a hand to wipe away a single tear. In her car, Sarah slammed her fist against the steering wheel. She didn't understand why she was so furious, so out of control. They had agreed from the start, divorce in 3 years. The man she loved was Leo. So why did seeing Daniel so calm, so unaffected, make her so blindingly angry? Her phone buzzed again. It was a text from Leo. "Sarah, when are you coming home?" She stared at the screen, a wave of intense irritation washing over her. She typed back a reply. Something came up. "Not coming back tonight." Then she turned off her phone, leaned her head back against the seat, and closed her eyes. All she could see was the image of Daniel's eyes, calm to the point of being cold. Daniel moved again. The new apartment was just as small, but this time he rented it under a friend's name and had his family help cover his tracks. Sarah wouldn't be able to find him now. The new place wasn't large, but it was filled with sunlight. He stood at the window, watching the bustling street below, and for the first time in years, he felt a sense of freedom. He had cut off all his old contacts, taking only his ID and a single bank card with his personal savings. He'd left behind all the expensive watches and designer clothes. All he wanted was a new beginning. He called his old friend, Mark Thompson. "Daniel." Mark's voice was full of surprised delight. "You're alive. Man, where have you been for the last 3 years? All I heard was that you married a Donovan, and then you just disappeared. I thought they had you locked in a tower somewhere. I was about to report you as a missing person." Daniel laughed. "It's a long story. Are you still running your design firm?" "Of course. My studio is actually getting pretty well known," Mark said proudly, before lowering his voice. "Hey, you calling me out of the blue like this? You're not in some kind of trouble, are you?" Daniel was quiet for a moment, deciding not to get into the details of the last 3 years. "I just want a fresh start," he said. "I need a job." "Say no more," Mark said without hesitation. "You can start at my studio tomorrow." Mark's studio was in an old office building downtown. The space simple, but with an artistic industrial feel. The moment Daniel pushed open the glass door, Mark rushed over and pulled him into a hug. "God, you're so thin," Mark said, squeezing his friend's shoulders. He then waved a hand dismissively. "Doesn't matter. You're here now. Starting today, you're my new lead designer." Daniel frowned, surprised, and shook his head. "No, I'm happy to start at the bottom." Mark just clapped him on the shoulder. "Don't be ridiculous. You were the star of our program in college. I was always bummed you didn't join me when I started this place. Now that you're finally here, I'm not going to waste your talent." Daniel found he couldn't argue. He sat down at his new desk, his fingers tracing the smooth surface of a brand new digital drawing tablet. It felt like reconnecting with a long-lost part of himself. Before his marriage, his greatest passion had been design, bringing his ideas to life on the page. But for 3 years, he hadn't touched it. In the days that followed, he threw himself back into his work with a renewed passion. He spent his days catching up on the latest industry trends and his nights refining his own designs. His style was unique, a blend of classical elegance and modern minimalism, and his work quickly began to stand out. A month later, Mark burst into his office, ecstatic. "Daniel, Your Stardust collection. It's been selected for the International Design Showcase in Paris. Daniel froze, then a slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. Are you serious? 100%, Mark said, waving the official invitation. It's showing in Paris next month, and you have to be there. Daniel took the invitation, his fingers trembling slightly as he held it. He had always dreamed of having his work recognized on an international stage, but he never imagined it would happen so soon. Those 3 long years. What else had he missed? But it didn't matter. It wasn't too late to start again. He had no idea that at that very moment, in the executive offices of the Donovan Corporation, Sarah was flipping through a design magazine. Her eyes suddenly froze on a page. Next to a design from a collection called Stardust was the designer's name, Daniel Y. Hayes. Her fingers tightened, creasing the page. Daniel Y. Hayes, she repeated, her expression unreadable. Her assistant, standing nearby, began to speak. Ms. Donovan, he's a new designer who's been getting a lot of buzz. His style is very unique, and apparently, investigate him. Sarah cut her off, her voice sharp. I want a complete file on him. The assistant nodded and left. Sarah continued to stare at the design. It was too familiar. The fluid lines, the attention to detail, that restrained but powerful style. It was identical to the work Daniel used to do. After their confrontation at his apartment, she had intended to go back, but by the time she did, he was gone. She'd had her assistant try to find him, but he had vanished without a trace. Now it seemed she finally had a lead. A coincidence, she murmured, that strange, restless feeling returning. Outside her window, the city lights glittered like a river of stars, but they couldn't penetrate the emptiness in her heart. The atmosphere in the Donovan Corporation boardroom was suffocating. The CFO slammed a report down on the table, his voice shaking. Ms. Donovan, the Vance fashion label project has lost over $100 million. The bank just called. They're freezing our liquid assets. Sarah sat at the head of the table, her expression grim. 3 months ago, when Leo had said he wanted to start his own fashion brand, she had approved a massive budget without a second thought. Now, the project was a catastrophic failure. Investors were pulling out, and the company's cash flow was stretched to the breaking point. Contact the bank in Zurich, she ordered. We'll leverage some of our stock. But Ms. Donovan, that's our emergency reserve. The CFO protested, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. The board will never, I said do it, she repeated, silencing him with a single look. Meanwhile, across town at the Donovan family mansion, chaos was erupting. What is this? Mrs. Donovan stormed into the living room, clutching a stack of bank statements, her normally composed face contorted with rage. Leo, who had been lounging on the sofa playing a video game, looked up lazily. Mrs. D, to what do I owe the sharp crack of her hand across his face, cut him off. You worthless leech, she shrieked, shaking the papers in her hand. How dare you embezzle company funds to buy a private island? And these auction receipts for jewelry, all purchased with Sarah's assets. Leo clutched his cheek, his eyes filling with tears. I was just borrowing it. Sarah said I could have whatever I wanted. That money is the result of generations of my family's hard work. Mrs. Donovan was shaking with such fury that she suddenly clutched her chest and staggered backward. The housekeeper rushed to her side. Ma'am, someone call an ambulance. As the sound of sirens approached, Leo quickly sent a text. Sarah, your mother just collapsed. I think she misunderstood something. Outside the VIP suite at the hospital, the senior board members cornered Sarah as she rushed in. Sarah, that boy gave your mother a heart attack. Mr. Roberts, one of the oldest board members, said, gesturing to where Mrs. Donovan lay, hooked up to a dozen machines. The company's finances are in ruins, and you're still protecting him? Sarah rubbed her temples. Leo is a good person. He would never do something like that, she said, her voice cold. As for the money, I will handle it. Handle it? By leveraging the last of the family's assets? Another board member, Mr. Chun, shot back. We just discovered he's registered a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. Just then, the door to the room opened, and Leo rushed out, throwing himself into her arms. They're all lying about me, he sobbed. I was only trying to help you, trying to learn about investing to lessen your burden. Sarah held him, her gaze sweeping over the board members. Do you have any proof? The board members were silent. Leo had covered his tracks well. The offshore accounts were untraceable. That's enough, Sarah said, shielding Leo with her body. We'll discuss this tomorrow. Down the hall, a small, Triumphant smile played on Leo's lips. Late that night in her office, Sarah's assistant delivered more bad news. The bank in Zurich has issued a margin call. We have 3 days to come up with a capital, or they'll liquidate our position. Sarah stood at her window, the entire city glittering at her feet, but the lights couldn't penetrate the darkness in her own heart. Her phone lit up. It was a text from Leo with a link to a brand new, custom-built sports car that cost as much as a house. She closed her eyes and authorized the transfer. Her assistant hesitated, then handed her a file. There's one more thing. That designer, Daniel Y. Hayes, we found his temporary address in Paris for the design showcase. Sarah spun around so quickly the file flew from her assistant's hand, its contents scattering across the floor. A photograph landed face up. It was him, Daniel, looking impossibly handsome in a designer suit, standing in front of his own exhibition. Just then, a loud clap of thunder echoed outside, and the rain began to fall. The Parisian night was a cascade of lights. Inside a 5-star hotel just off the Champs-Élysées, the International Design Association was hosting a gala. Crystal chandeliers cast a brilliant glow over the mingling crowd of designers, socialites, and industry titans. Daniel moved through the crowd in a perfectly tailored suit, his hair styled back, a diamond-encrusted watch on his wrist. He looked like a different person. Holding a glass of champagne, he chatted easily with a group of creative directors from major fashion houses, his every gesture radiating a newfound confidence. Daniel, your Stardust collection is simply breathtaking, a French designer gushed. The lines are so fluid, it's like you've draped the models in the Milky Way itself. Daniel smiled, about to reply, when he felt a pair of sharp eyes on him. He turned his head and his smile faltered. It was Sarah. She stood across the room in a black mermaid gown, her expression cold, her eyes locked on him like a predator. At her side, his arm draped possessively around her shoulders, was Leo. He was dressed in a white suit, a polite smile on his face that froze the moment he saw Daniel. Daniel quickly looked away, turning back to his conversation as if he hadn't seen them. But Sarah was already walking toward him. Daniel, the designers around him, sensed the shift in atmosphere and discreetly moved away. Daniel looked up, a polite, distant smile on his face. Ms. Donovan, it's been a while. Have you been avoiding me? She asked, her voice low and tight with a barely suppressed anger. Daniel gave a short, humorless laugh, swirling the champagne in his glass. You're joking, Ms. Donovan. We're divorced. There's no reason for me to avoid you. Sarah's frown deepened. Leo hurried to her side, draping his arm around her shoulders again and looking at Daniel with feigned surprise. Well, if it isn't Mr. Hayes. Fancy seeing you here. He looked Daniel up and down, a condescending smirk on his face. Looks like you're doing all right for yourself since the divorce, managing to sneak into a party like this. Daniel's expression didn't change. He gave Leo a dismissive glance. Are you always this incoherent, Mr. Vance? I was invited here because I belong here. A flash of jealousy crossed Leo's face. Why do you have to be here? Did you get in because of some special arrangement? He put a sleazy emphasis on the words special arrangement, causing a few nearby guests to glance over. Sarah frowned. Leo, stop it, she said in a low voice. Leo ignored her. I'm just curious. Sarah, are you defending him now? This is a man who hadn't touched a sketchbook in years, and suddenly he's the industry's new rising star? Am I not allowed to find that a little suspicious? Mr. Hayes, are you still upset with Sarah and me? It wasn't what it looked like. We were just friends back then. Daniel's expression remained placid. I have no interest in your relationship with Ms. Donovan, Mr. Vance. You, on the other hand, seem to be quite interested in me. You seem to know so much about my past. How could you not know that I graduated at the top of my class from design school? Leo was speechless for a moment, then sneered. Who knows what kind of strings you pulled to get that? Daniel calmly pulled a business card from his jacket and handed it to one of the creative directors standing nearby. Since Mr. Vance questions my credentials, perhaps you'd like to see this. The director took the card. Daniel Y. Hayes, he read, his eyes widening. You're the winner of this year's Milan Prize? A ripple of impressed murmurs went through the small crowd. If Daniel Hayes isn't qualified to be here, I don't know who is, someone said. I've never even heard of this Vance fellow, another added. He's probably the one who crashed. It's obviously jealousy, a third person whispered. Didn't you hear him? He was clearly the other man in their marriage. Leo's face went rigid. He turned to Sarah, a helpless look on his face. No, that's not what I meant, Sarah. I swear. Daniel just smiled. Ms. Donovan, Mr. Vance, if you'll excuse me. He turned to leave, but Sarah shoved Leo aside and grabbed his wrist. We need to talk, she said, her voice low and intense. Daniel stopped, glancing down at her hand on his arm. Ms. Donovan, he said coolly, let go of me. Her eyes darkened, but her grip remained firm. Leo rushed forward and took Sarah's other hand, his face a mask of concern. Sarah, darling, don't we have that meeting with Mr. Smith? We shouldn't be late. For the first time, Sarah ignored him, her eyes still fixed on Daniel. 5 minutes. Daniel gently but firmly pulled his arm from her grasp. I'm sorry, he said, his tone polite but firm. I have a meeting with some partners. If you'll excuse me. With that, he turned and walked away, his back straight and his stride confident, joining a group of designers across the room. Sarah stood frozen in place, her eyes as dark as a starless night. Leo shot a hateful glare at Daniel's retreating back, then turned to Sarah. Sarah, can you believe him? He's still holding a grudge against me. But Sarah cut him off with a look, her voice sharp with an unfamiliar impatience. Go back to the hotel. What? I said, go back to the hotel, she repeated, the impatience in her eyes now unmistakable. Tears welled up in Leo's eyes. You're going after him? But Sarah didn't even look at him. She was already walking in the direction Daniel had gone. Leo stood rooted to the spot, his nails digging into his palms, his eyes burning with a furious, jealous hatred. Daniel, meanwhile, was deep in conversation, completely unaware of her approach. It was only when her shadow fell over him that he turned and saw Sarah standing right behind him. Daniel, she said, her voice low, I never said we were over. Ms. Donovan, I hear the Donovan Corporation is in a bit of trouble these days. Before Daniel could respond, Mark stepped between them, pulling Daniel behind him. Instead of harassing your ex-husband, Mark said, his eyes narrowed, shouldn't you be focused on cleaning up the mess at your company? To throw everything away for a man like that. I'm just glad Daniel got away from you when he did. What did you just say? She asked, her voice a low, dangerous growl. I'm sure your own board members have told you. Mark continued, unfazed. Are you really going to keep pretending you don't know what that man of yours has been doing behind your back? The light from a nearby champagne fountain glittered, and the sound of a string quartet drifted through the air, but it couldn't disguise the tense, confrontational energy in their small corner of the room. Mark swirled the champagne in his glass, a mocking smile on his face. Your first love is bankrupting your company, and you have time to attend parties? Sarah's eyes darkened, her knuckles whitening as she gripped her glass. Mr. Thompson, I suggest you watch your mouth. Why? Did I say something untrue? Mark shot back, pulling Daniel further behind him. The amount of money Leo Vance has siphoned from your company in the last 3 months is enough to buy a small island, isn't it? Nearby guests were beginning to stare, their whispers growing louder. Daniel frowned and tugged on his friend's sleeve. Mark, let's just go. She's the one who should be embarrassed, not me. Mark said, his voice rising. Sarah Donovan drove her family's company into the ground for that con artist. And now she has the audacity to come here and harass you? Sarah's face was a tight mask of fury. She lunged forward and grabbed Daniel's wrist again. We need to talk. Get your hands off him. Mark shouted, slapping her hand away. You're divorced. What part of that don't you understand? The stares of the other guests were becoming more intense. Someone had even taken out their phone to record. Daniel took a deep breath. Follow me. He led her out into the garden, where the night air was cool and smelled of roses. The sound of a fountain masked the noise from the party, but it did nothing to diffuse the tension between them. Daniel, Sarah began, her voice hoarse as she reached for him. It's not what you think. It doesn't matter what I think, he said, taking a step back to avoid her touch. Sarah, we're over. I don't care about the past. Just please stay out of my life. Daniel, this is ridiculous, she said, stepping toward him, her voice sharp with impatience at his rejection. I never wanted to divorce you. It's just that Leo, he was all alone, he needed me. Can't you stop being so jealous? A sharp slap echoed through the garden, startling a bird from a nearby tree. Mark stood between them, shaking out his stinging hand. Needed you, he sneered. Is that what you call it? Letting him embezzle millions from your company? Letting him live in the house you shared with your husband? Letting him brag on Facebook about the sports cars you buy him? There are plenty of lonely people in the world. Why don't you go take care of all of them? Sarah turned her head, the imprint of his hand red on her cheek. A storm was gathering in her eyes. You don't understand, she hissed. Leo is different. He different how? Mark cut her off. Because he's an orphan? Because he's so helpless? He pulled out his phone and began swiping aggressively. Here, let's see what your precious first love has been up to. He shoved the phone in her face. There were photos of Leo on a private yacht with a wealthy older woman, at a casino in Monaco with another, and most damningly, a picture of him with his arm around the daughter of her company's biggest rival, walking into a hotel. The photo was dated 3 days ago. That's impossible, Sarah whispered, stumbling backward, her eyes wide with shock. Why do you think he came back to New York? Mark pressed, taking a step toward her. That story about his gambling-addicted father? He made it all up. The truth is, he's the one with the gambling problem. He racked up a massive debt overseas and came running back here to escape the people he owed. Daniel's head snapped up, a look of shock on his own face. Sarah's face was as white as a sheet, a vein throbbing in her temple. You're lying, she shrieked. Am I? Why don't you look into it yourself, Ms. Donovan? Mark said, pulling Daniel back and patting his shoulder reassuringly. And stop with the act. You weren't taking care of him. You wanted to have your cake and eat it too. The only reason you're so desperate now is because Daniel is finally out of your control. Daniel, it's not what he's saying, Sarah said, turning to him, her voice desperate. I didn't know. It doesn't matter anymore, Sarah, he said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. It's better for both of us if we just go our separate ways. With that, Daniel turned and, with Mark at his side, walked away without a backward glance. Watching him go, a look of anguish crossed Sarah's face. With a trembling hand, she pulled out her phone and called her assistant. I want a full background check on Leo Vance. Everything he's done for the past 5 years. I need to know who's lying. Sarah stood at her office window, a freshly delivered report in her hand. Outside, a torrential rain was falling, the water streaming down the glass and blurring the city lights into a watercolor wash. After what Mark had said in Paris, a seed of doubt had been planted. The first thing she did when she got back to New York was have her assistant compile a complete report on Leo's activities since he'd left the country. Are you certain this information is accurate? She asked, her voice low and dangerous. Her assistant stood ramrod straight. It's been triple-checked, ma'am. Mr. Vance's mother's medical records show clear signs of forgery. The doctor who supposedly signed her leukemia diagnosis doesn't exist. Sarah's knuckles turned white as she crumpled the report in her hand. Go on. We also found that Mr. Vance was involved with several wealthy older women during his time in Europe. We found a private Instagram account where he frequently posted photos of expensive gifts, all during the time he was claiming to be financially destitute. Her assistant handed her a tablet. On the screen was a selfie of Leo wearing a diamond-encrusted watch. The caption read, "Thank for the gift, babe. Love you." The post was dated the same week she had leveraged her own assets to pay for his mother's treatment. Her expression turned to ice. Get him here. Half an hour later, her office door opened. Sarah, Leo said, walking in with a smile. Did you miss me? His smile froze when he saw the papers scattered across her desk. Sarah slowly turned and slid a photograph across the desk toward him. Do you recognize this woman? The photo showed Leo with his arm around a short, heavy-set older woman in a Las Vegas casino. That's, he stammered, his body beginning to tremble. He lunged across the desk and grabbed her arm. Sarah, let me explain. She's a business associate of my cousin's. She insisted we take a picture. And this, Sarah said, tossing another photo onto the desk. It was Leo, lounging on a yacht in swim trunks, surrounded by 3 women in bikinis. It was dated the week his mother was supposedly on her deathbed. All the color drained from Leo's face. And this, she said, pressing play on a recording on her phone. His own arrogant voice filled the room. Sarah is so easy. I tell her my mom needs a bone marrow transplant. She doesn't even question it. I tell her I need money. She just hands it over. I made up that whole fashion label idea on the spot, and she gave me $100 million without even blinking. Once the rest of the money comes through, we're heading to the Maldives. No, that's not me, Leo screamed, his eyes bloodshot. Someone is trying to frame me. Sarah, you have to believe me. She lunged across the desk and grabbed him by the throat, her eyes blazing with a furious crimson light. The medical reports were fake. Your mother was never sick. She, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room. Finally, seeing there was no way out, he shoved her away. Fine, I lied. So what? The tears vanished from his eyes, replaced by a contemptuous sneer. You think you're so special? You're cold and boring. If it weren't for your money, who do you think would put up with you? Sarah's eyes narrowed dangerously. I was only ever after your money, he continued, his voice dripping with venom. I thought I could marry into the Donovan family, but you couldn't even stand up to your parents. So I took the money you gave me and left. Unfortunately, it didn't last as long as I'd hoped. But that's okay. All I had to do was come back and snap my fingers, and you came running right back to me. My friends were right. You really are a loyal little puppy. You're dead, she hissed. Temper, temper, he said, pulling a flash drive from his pocket and dangling it in front of her. Don't forget, I know all of the Donovan Corporation's dirty little secrets, like that off-the-books fund you set up last quarter. The color drained from Sarah's face. She lunged for the drive, but Leo just laughed, holding it out to her. I'm not as naive as you are, Ms. Donovan. I've always had a backup plan. This is just one copy. I wonder where the others are. A flash of lightning illuminated the pure, naked malice in his eyes. If anything happens to me, he said, his voice a low, vicious snarl, I'll make sure the Donovan Corporation goes down with me. In the top-floor boardroom of the Donovan Corporation, the sky outside the windows was a uniform, dismal gray. The numbers on the projector screen were a sea of red, each digit a fresh cut, bleeding the life out of the century-old company. Trading is halted again, the CFO said, his voice trembling. The bank is calling in our loans, effective immediately. All eyes in the room turned to Sarah, the fawning admiration of the board members now replaced with open contempt. Ms. Donovan, Mr. Roberts slammed his hand on the table. You need to answer for these accusations Leo Vance has made public. Sarah's knuckles were white where she gripped the edge of the table, the veins standing out on the back of her hand. She had let him go, and the moment he knew the money had dried up, he had disappeared, leaking a steady stream of the company's secrets to the press. Have you found him? She asked, her voice a raw whisper. Her assistant shook his head. The last security footage we have is of him at the airport, but his name isn't on any flight manifests. The bank in Zurich confirmed he emptied the last of the corporate accounts before he disappeared. A dead silence fell over the room. Sarah abruptly grabbed her coat and walked toward the door. Ms. Donovan, where are you going? The meeting's over, she said, not looking back. The elevator took her directly to the parking garage. She got in her car and pulled up an address on her phone. Mark Thompson's design studio. When Daniel walked through the glass doors of the studio, he stopped short. Sarah was standing at the reception desk. Her clothes were wrinkled, and her normally perfect hair was a mess. The moment she saw him, a desperate, hopeful light flickered in her eyes. Daniel. The use of his first name made him raise an eyebrow. He handed his umbrella to his assistant, his voice calm and even. Ms. Donovan, can I help you? Her throat worked for a moment before she spoke. Can we talk? In private. We can talk here, he said, dismissing his assistant, but making no move to invite her into his office. I have a meeting in 5 minutes. Rainwater dripped from the ends of her hair, leaving dark spots on the rug. It struck her then, more clearly than ever before, that the man who had once waited up all night for her wouldn't even offer her a cup of tea now. I'm sure you've heard about what's happening at my company, she said, her voice hoarse. For the first time in her life, she sounded defeated. You were right. I never should have trusted him. Now, I need the Hayes family's help. Daniel let out a short, sharp laugh, looking up from a stack of papers on the reception desk. So, you're here to ask for money? It's not just about money, she said, taking a step closer. The Hayes family has connections, political and financial. You're the only one who can help me now. And why would I be willing to help you? He asked, closing the folder he'd been looking at, his eyes like chips of ice. Have you forgotten, Ms. Donovan? We're divorced. His words hit her like a physical slap. She grabbed his wrist. I was good to you when you were part of my family. Help me this one time. You can name your price. His eyes flickered down to her hand on his arm, and a cold smile touched his lips. So now you're willing to negotiate? Too bad. I have no interest in saving your company. Daniel, she cried, her voice cracking. Please, I'm begging you. The woman who never begged was standing before him, her eyes red and pleading. For a second, he was transported back in time to all the nights he had waited for her, just as desperate, just as helpless. Beg me, he said with a soft, ironic laugh. I begged you for a lot of things over the years, Sarah, but as you're about to find out, we don't always get what we want. Every word was a knife in her heart. She wanted to argue, to defend herself, but she knew he was right. Sarah, he said, picking up his briefcase. I'm sorry for what's happened to you, but it is not my problem. He walked to the door, his back straight and proud. It was, as you always said, just a business arrangement. Nothing to be taken seriously. The glass door swung shut behind him. leaving Sarah standing alone in the reception area, stunned into silence. His assistant hurried out of the office. "Mr. Hayes, your flight to Milan is booked for 10 a.m. tomorrow." "Thank you," Daniel's voice replied, already distant. "Oh, and from now on, please don't let any unauthorized visitors into the studio." Outside, the rain was coming down harder than ever. Sarah's phone buzzed. It was a news alert. Donovan Corporation stock plummets 60%. CEO Sarah Donovan's personal fortune wiped out as company faces bankruptcy. She looked up in the direction he had gone, and a single thought echoed in her mind. She had lost everything. Sarah sat in her study, staring out at the rain. On the television, a business news channel was running a special report. Rising star designer Daniel Y. Hayes has won the prestigious Milan Gold Medal for design. His Stardust brand is now valued at over $1 billion. On the screen, Daniel stood on a stage in a white tuxedo, smiling. His eyes were bright, and he radiated a calm, easy confidence. When a reporter asked him the secret to his success, he leaned into the microphone and said, "The first step is learning to love yourself." Sarah's hand clenched into a fist, her fingers trembling. Mr. Hayes also recently announced the formation of the Hayes Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing seed money for young entrepreneurs. To date, the foundation has helped over 300 young people start their own businesses. The sound from the television faded into a dull drone. Sarah stood up and stumbled toward a room she hadn't entered in months, Daniel's old bedroom. When she opened the door, the faint, familiar scent of his cologne washed over her, so vivid it was as if he'd just left. A half-empty bottle of his hand lotion was still on the nightstand. A few of his old sweaters were still hanging in the closet. She reached out and took one down, a soft, beige cashmere, and brought it to her face, inhaling the last, faint traces of his scent. She suddenly remembered a winter night 3 years ago. She had come home from work late, and he had been waiting for her, asleep on the couch in this very sweater. He had woken up and gone to the kitchen to heat up some soup for her, and had burned his hand in the process. Little things like that had happened all the time during their marriage, and she had never paid them any mind. A loud slam from downstairs pulled her from a reverie. The housekeeper stood in the doorway, her expression pained. "Miss, it's the bank again. They say if we can't make a payment by next week, they'll begin foreclosure proceedings." Sarah waved a dismissive hand, and the housekeeper retreated. She sank down onto the bench at the foot of his bed. In a mirror, a haggard face stared back at her, her eyes sunken, her hair a mess. The powerful, confident CEO of the Donovan Corporation was gone. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Mr. Roberts. "Sarah, I've known you since you were a little girl, so I'm telling you this as a friend. The board has voted. They're removing you as CEO next week." "I'm sorry." Sarah gave a bitter laugh. Her eyes fell on a piece of paper sticking out of a drawer in the dresser. She pulled it open. Inside was a small journal, filled with Daniel's neat, elegant handwriting. It was a record of her. March 15th. Sarah's stomach is bothering her. Remember to make the special oatmeal. May 20th. Pollen season. Make sure there are allergy pills in the car. July 8th. Anniversary. Finally found that bracelet she wanted. The last entry was from the week before their divorce. Sarah's birthday tomorrow. The necklace finally arrived. Remember to order the Black Forest cake. Not too sweet and no peanuts. I hope someone remembers next year. Her vision blurred with tears. She remembered that birthday. Remembered throwing his gift in the trash to appease Leo. Now, she remembered that the necklace had been the exact limited edition design she had once mentioned wanting. A sudden round of applause from the television drew her attention. Daniel was on screen again, this time in a press conference. A reporter was asking a question. "Mr. Hayes, you were married once. Has that experience had an impact on your work?" Daniel smiled. "I would say it has. That marriage taught me a very important lesson. Never lose yourself for someone else." Sarah slammed the off button on the remote. The only sound in the silent room was the rain against the window pane. She stared at her reflection and remembered the way Daniel had looked the day he left. His back straight, his steps firm and resolute, without a single backward glance. When had he made the decision to leave? Was it when she'd offered up her bone marrow without a second thought? Was it one of the countless times she had abandoned him for Leo? Was it the day her mother had had him beaten? Outside, the storm raged. Suddenly, the power went out, plunging the room into darkness. Sarah sat frozen in the dark. It was only when she raised a hand to her face that she felt the cold, wet tracks of her own tears. She finally understood. The most painful punishment in the world wasn't bankruptcy or betrayal. It was realizing too late that the person who had once loved you more than life itself had moved on and become someone so far out of your league you could never hope to reach them again. But she couldn't give up. He had loved her so much. How could he have thrown all that away over a few small mistakes? Daniel, you have the meeting with the LVMH representatives at 10 and the runway show at 3. I have the briefing materials ready for you. Is there anything else you need? Daniel was about to reply to his assistant when he stopped, frowning at the familiar figure standing by the reception desk. It was Sarah. She was wearing a wrinkled dress and holding 2 cups of coffee. She had dark circles under her eyes, but the moment she saw him, her dull eyes lit up. Daniel, she said, hurrying toward him and forcing a smile. I brought you a latte. Double shot of vanilla syrup, just how you like it. His eyes flickered to the cup, and a humorless, ironic smile touched his lips. How I like it, or how Leo likes it. Sarah's hand froze in midair. Is there something I can help you with? Daniel asked. He dismissed his assistant, but made no move to invite her into his office. I'm on a tight schedule. Her eyes were pleading. Just 10 minutes. Talk about what? Daniel asked, crossing his arms. How you ran the Donovan Corporation into the ground. Or about your true love, who ran off with all your money. Unfortunately for you, I'm not interested in either of those topics. Her lips trembled as she reached out and grabbed his wrist. I know I was wrong, Daniel. I came here to apologize. Please, just give me one more chance. Daniel snatched his hand away, a cold sneer on his face. So now you know how to beg? What did you say when I warned you about Leo? He looked her up and down, his voice a perfect, mocking imitation of her own. Leo is a good person. He would never do something like that. The last bit of color drained from Sarah's face. I wasn't thinking clearly, but I swear, nothing ever really happened between us. That doesn't matter to me, Daniel said, turning to leave. Get out of my way, I'm going to be late. Wait, Sarah cried, blocking his path, the words tumbling out of her in a rush. We had good times, didn't we? Why do you only remember the bad things? Don't you remember? That time you had that awful fever. I stayed with you at the hospital all night. And for your birthday, I canceled my meetings to go with you. Daniel let out a laugh, so cold it made her shiver. You stayed at the hospital that night because your precious Leo had a sniffle. You even sent my doctor over to his room because he complained of a little heartburn. And that birthday trip, you only took me to Paris because Leo was there. I never even wanted to go to Paris. You bought the tickets and used my birthday as an excuse. Sarah's lips trembled, her eyes wide with panic. I know it was awful sometimes. But the good things, the way I treated you, it wasn't all a lie. Good to you? What else was there? He asked, looking down at her with contempt. Giving me the watch Leo rejected? Or spending Christmas night standing outside his apartment building in a snowstorm? Sarah was speechless, her hand clutching uselessly at his sleeve. But I know I was wrong now. It's you I love, I realize that now. Love, Daniel repeated, shaking her off and taking 2 steps back. Sarah, the only person you have ever loved is yourself. You're only here now, humbling yourself like this because you need my family's connections to save your company. No, she cried desperately. It's not about the company. We love each other. Why are you being so stubborn? Daniel picked up one of the coffees she had brought and threw its contents squarely in her face. The brown liquid dripped from her chin onto her designer dress, earning a gasp from the receptionist. Are you awake now? Daniel asked, his voice like ice. This pathetic act, Ms. Donovan. It's disgusting. Sarah sat on the floor in a stupor, coffee dripping from her eyelashes. As she watched him walk away without a backward glance, she remembered a time long ago when she had thrown a glass of water in his face. He had stood there, his eyes red, and forced a smile as he told her it was all right. Now, he wouldn't even give her a second look. His assistant hurried to catch up. Daniel, should I call security? Don't bother, he said, pressing the elevator button without looking back. She's a nobody. On a rainy night in Paris, Sarah huddled on the bed of a cheap motel in St. Denis. The wallpaper was peeling, the sheets were stained, and the neon sign outside the grimy window cast shifting, colored shadows across her pale face. The phone on a nightstand lit up with a 15th threatening text from a loan shark. Pay up in 48 hours, or we're coming to collect your body. Her hand trembled as she grabbed a half-empty bottle of cheap whiskey, the alcohol burning its way down her throat. On the television, an international news report was playing. American citizen Leo Vance has been arrested in Switzerland in connection with an international fraud and money laundering scheme totaling over 200 million euros. The footage cut to a police station in Geneva, where a handcuffed Leo, his carefully styled hair now a tangled mess, was being led away. When a reporter shouted a question about where the money went, he lunged toward the camera, screaming, "It was Sarah Donovan. She orchestrated the whole thing. All the money passed through her accounts." The whiskey bottle slipped from Sarah's hand and hit the floor. Amber liquid soaked into the threadbare carpet. She stared at his twisted, screaming face on the screen and remembered their last confrontation in her office. "If I go down, I'm taking the Donovan Corporation with me." He had kept his promise. Her phone buzzed. It was an email from a bank. "The Donovan Corporation assets you leveraged as collateral have now entered liquidation." The century-old Donovan empire was about to fall. Suddenly, a violent kicking sound came from her door. "Donovan, we know you're in there," a man shouted in a thick accent. "Open this door, or we'll burn this whole place to the ground." Sarah staggered to her feet and caught her reflection in the cracked mirror. The person staring back was a stranger, a woman with hollow eyes and streaks of gray in her matted hair, her expensive designer dress now stained and reeking. The powerful CEO was gone. With a loud crash, the window shattered. A flaming torch was thrown inside, and the cheap curtains instantly went up in flames. Sarah grabbed her coat and ran, colliding with the thugs in the hallway. The leader, a large, brutish man, grabbed her by the collar. "Going somewhere," he sneered. They slammed her against the wall, and she felt the cold steel of a knife against her throat. "The boss says you get one last chance," the man said, his breath reeking of stale beer. "I hear you were real generous with that boyfriend of yours. Get the money back from him, get it to us, and we'll let you live." Sarah let out a raw, hysterical laugh. "I'm looking for him too. Why don't you try the prison in Geneva? As for me, you've already taken every last cent I have." The blade bit into her skin, and she felt a warm trickle of blood run down her neck. Just as she thought it was all over, the sound of police sirens grew louder, closer. "Damn it, I told you not to make a scene," the leader cursed, and the thugs scattered. Sarah slid down the wall to the floor. She covered her face, and a wild, broken laugh escaped her lips, which quickly turned into gut-wrenching sobs. "I was wrong," she wept. "I was so wrong." That same day, in a prison in Geneva, Leo huddled in the corner of an interrogation room, all his former arrogance gone. When a guard informed him that no one had come forward to hire him a lawyer, he flew into a rage, throwing a cup of water at the security camera. "Do you know who I am?" he shrieked, his voice echoing off the concrete walls. "I'm the future head of the Donovan Corporation. Why get out of here? I'll make you all pay." A guard entered and emotionlessly administered a sedative. As the sedative took hold, Leo caught a glimpse of his reflection in the one-way glass. He saw a man with hair like straw, his eyes bloodshot, his cheeks hollow. The expensive designer suit was gone, replaced by an orange jumpsuit. Was that really him? The charming, elegant man who had once held Sarah Donovan in the palm of his hand? The heavy steel door slammed shut, and the darkness swallowed his final, bitter sob. At a reception during Milan Design Week, Daniel was in conversation with a group of brand executives when Mark tapped him on the shoulder. "Hey, there's someone I want you to meet." He turned. Standing under the crystal chandelier was a woman in a stunning midnight blue gown. Her features were elegant, and her eyes, behind a pair of delicate gold-rimmed glasses, were warm and intelligent. "This is my sister, Chloe Thompson," Mark said with a wink. "She's an international lawyer, just transferred back from Geneva. She specializes in protecting the rights of the vulnerable party in divorce cases." "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Mr. Hayes," Chloe said, extending a hand. Her grip was firm and warm. "I've seen the sketches for your Phoenix collection. The way you use those fractured, reassembled lines, it's breathtaking." Daniel was taken aback. Most people preferred his more commercial Stardust collection. Very few appreciated the Phoenix series, and no one had ever understood its hidden meaning. The story of a spirit crushed by a toxic marriage, and its slow, painful rebirth. "You have an interest in design, Miss Thompson? I just appreciate beautiful things," she said, handing him her card. As she did, her finger lightly brushed against the faint scar on the inside of his wrist, a relic from his time with the Donovans. He instinctively started to pull his hand back, but then she spoke again, her voice soft. "The line of this scar, it reminds me of the etched details in your designs." For a moment, the noise of the party seemed to fade away. In 3 years, no one had ever looked at that scar with anything other than pity or morbid curiosity. She looked at it as if it were a piece of art. 3 months later, Daniel stood on a stage at the launch of the Hayes Foundation. The room was packed with reporters, and Chloe stood at his side, acting as his legal counsel. Whenever a reporter asked a particularly invasive question, she would step in, deflecting it with a calm, professional, and legally airtight response. "Mr. Hayes," one reporter called out, "is it true you started this foundation as a form of revenge against your ex-wife? Were you involved in the collapse of her company?" Before Daniel could answer, a slender hand gently took the microphone from him. "Nonprofit foundations are subject to rigorous federal and state oversight," Chloe said, her voice calm and measured. "To suggest that this organization was founded for any reason other than its stated charitable purpose is to question the integrity of our legal and financial regulatory systems." "Is that what you're doing, sir?" The reporter was rendered speechless. After the press conference, Daniel found a cup of warm herbal tea waiting for him in the green room. Tucked underneath, it was a note. "You were brilliant today. Don't let the gossip get to you. I'll always be in your corner." See, he held the warm cup, remembering that his assistant had told him Chloe had canceled an important meeting to be there for him. Through the steam rising from the tea, he watched her as she organized her papers, and for the first time, he truly saw her. He saw the unwavering support and belief in her eyes. One late autumn evening, Daniel was working late at the studio when the power suddenly went out. "It's okay," a voice said from the darkness. "About a light." It was Chloe. The glow of her phone's flashlight illuminated her face, and he could see the worry in her eyes. "What are you doing here?" he asked. "Mar told me you've been pulling all-nighters. I just wanted to check on you." She held up a thermos. "My mom made soup. It's good for you." A sudden warmth spread through Daniel's chest. He remembered all the times he had been the one with a container of soup, waiting for someone who never came home. "Chloe," he said, saying her name with a new sense of gravity. "Why are you so good to me?" In the dim light, he saw her start to reach for him, then stop herself. "Because you deserve it," she said simply. It's as simple as that. Meanwhile, in a private psychiatric facility outside New York, Sarah Donovan stared at a photo in a business magazine. It was Daniel and Chloe standing side by side. Her fists clenched so tightly her knuckles were white. A small headline in the corner of the page burned itself into her brain. "Thompson heiress and Stardust founder. A power couple in the making." She frantically dialed a number she knew by heart, a number that had long been blocked. A nurse gently took the phone from her hand. "Ms. Donovan, it's time for your medication." Outside the window, autumn leaves swirled in the wind. She thought of a man who had once waited for her, for years, to just turn around and see him. The stardust was still shining, but it was no longer lighting up her world. In a private room at University Hospital, the air smelled of antiseptic. Mrs. Donovan lay propped up in bed, her frail fingers tracing a photograph in an old album. It was Daniel, from the early days of his marriage to Sarah, looking young and earnest. "Ma'am, Mr. Hayes is here," the housekeeper announced softly. Mrs. Donovan's head snapped up as the door opened. Daniel stood there, dressed in a stylish camel coat, his hair perfectly in place. The eager-to-please young man she remembered was gone, replaced by a man of quiet confidence. "Daniel," she rasped, trying to get out of bed. She stumbled, collapsing to her knees on the floor. He took an instinctive step forward, then caught himself. Still on her knees, she clutched at the hem of his coat, tears streaming down her face. "I am so sorry," she wept. Daniel looked down at the woman who had once had him beaten, now crumpled at his feet like a dead leaf. He bent to help her up, but she grabbed his wrist. "This is the Donovan family ring," she said, her voice trembling as she tried to slide a heavy signet ring from her own finger onto his. "It's for the man who marries a Donovan daughter. I should have given it to you then. I was a fool." The moment the cold metal touched his skin, he pulled his hand back. The ring clattered to the floor and broke in two. "Have you forgotten?" he asked, looking down at the broken pieces, his expression unreadable. 3 days after the wedding, you told me I was common, that I wasn't worthy of this ring." Mrs. Donovan's sobs caught in her throat. She remembered that day, remembered taking the ring and, in front of the entire family, placing it on Leo's finger as a joke. "It was all his fault," she wailed, clutching at Daniel's coat again. "He tricked Sarah. He ruined our family." "Do you really believe this is all Leo's fault?" Daniel interrupted. "Can you honestly say you didn't know what was happening? You stood by and let it happen. You encouraged it." Mrs. Donovan gasped for breath, changing the subject. She pulled a document from under her pillow. "This is the last 5% of the company's stock. It's yours if you just help Sarah. So that's what this is about, he said, pushing the papers back toward her. You use your health to guilt me into coming here, hoping I'd see how pathetic you've all become and take pity on you. He shook his head. I'm sorry. The Donovan Corporation is a sinking ship, and I have no intention of going down with it. No, please, she begged, her eyes red and raw. Daniel, you were married to her. After all those years, don't you feel anything? You, of all people, should know the answer to that, he said, straightening his coat. He turned to leave. I've taken care of your hospital bills. Consider it payment for all the care you showed me over the years. Or even now, Mrs. Donovan tasted blood at the back of her throat. She grabbed for him one last time. Daniel, please, I'm begging you. At least go see her. There's no point, he said. As the door clicked shut behind him, he heard the long, flat tone of a heart monitor. Nurses rushed past him into the room. He took a step back, but he did not turn around. The next morning, he received word that Mrs. Donovan had passed away. Daniel, do you want to go to the service? Chloe asked, handing him a cup of tea. I can go with you if you'd like. No, there's no need, he said, his eyes on the design sketch in front of him. I have to finish this. I don't have time for distractions. He sensed her ghost still beside him and glanced over. Chloe, do you think I'm being cruel? No, Daniel, she said softly. I think you're being brave. Daniel, will you marry me? They were standing in a field of wildflowers. Chloe was on one knee, holding up a simple, elegant diamond ring. Beside them, Mark was grinning from ear to ear, filming the whole thing on his phone. Daniel stared at her, stunned, then broke into a smile. Isn't this a little sudden? I started planning this 6 months ago, the day we officially became a couple, Chloe said, her expression serious and sincere. I knew then, you're the one for me, the only one. We're so compatible, in work and in life. We love each other. I can't think of a single reason why we should wait. Daniel felt his eyes begin to burn. She was right. Being with her was easy, comfortable. When he was sick, she would drop everything to take care of him. When he was stuck on a design, she would stay up with him until 3 in the morning, brainstorming. She was his biggest supporter, his partner in every sense of the word. Daniel, don't just stand there, Mark said, his own voice thick with emotion. It's okay if you're not ready, man. I kind of forced this, but there's no pressure. Yes, Daniel said. Mark's voice cut off. As Daniel reached for the ring, Mark let out a whoop and threw his arms around him. This is amazing. We're finally going to be family. Chloe, her hands still outstretched, shot her brother an annoyed look before turning her smiling eyes back to Daniel. On the day of the wedding, as Mark was adjusting Daniel's tie, his eyes grew misty. Daniel, he said, his voice thick, you'd better be happy. Daniel laughed, though his own eyes were suspiciously bright. What? You don't trust me with your sister? No, man, Mark said, wiping at his eyes. I'm just really happy for you both. As the organ began to play, he saw Chloe waiting for him at the altar, her fingers trembling slightly. When the officiant got to her vows, she said, I do, so quickly and eagerly that the entire church erupted in fond laughter. When it came time for the bouquet toss, Chloe aimed it high and far back. The flowers sailed over the guests' heads and grazed a pillar in the very last row. He saw a stooped figure in a hat and a face mask flinch away from it. What is it? Chloe asked, following his gaze. Nothing, Daniel said, turning back and kissing his new wife. I thought I saw something. A few days later, at the psychiatric facility outside New York. Ms. Donovan, your account is past due, a nurse said, handing her a bill. If payment isn't received by tomorrow, we'll have to ask you to leave. Sarah took the bill, her expression blank. After her company's bankruptcy and her mother's death, this place had been her home. The once brilliant businesswoman could no longer even afford her own medical care. As she dragged a small suitcase out the front gates, a news report was playing on a large screen across the street. Daniel Hayes, creator of the Stardust brand, was married in a private ceremony this weekend. The news comes as his company's valuation reaches a new all-time high. On the screen, Daniel was smiling, a brilliant diamond ring flashing on his hand. His new wife, Chloe, leaned against his shoulder, the picture of happiness. They looked perfect together. Sarah stood frozen on the sidewalk as a light rain began to fall, soaking her thin coat. She remembered a time when Daniel had looked at her with that same smile, a look she had never once appreciated. Rain and tears mingled on her cheeks. She knew, with a terrible, final certainty, that the Daniel who had once loved her more than anything had finally found the happiness he deserved. and she had forever lost the only person who had ever truly loved her.